Hello, fellow kids, and welcome back to What is Politics? So, we're all out here on these internet streets, watching our societies and our economies and our world heading slowly but surely down a dark path of more and more inequality and less democracy and less hope. And along with that comes rising frustration and anger as things keep deteriorating and we don't really have much of a say in anything that's happening. To make matters worse, as people in many countries are abandoning the traditional center-left and center-right parties that brought us down this dark path, they're lashing out in all the wrong ways, and they're replacing those elitist parties with these phony right-wing populist parties whose policies will just accelerate all of the exploding inequality and disintegrating democracy that's gotten everyone so angry to begin with. Meanwhile, what's called the left, it's just completely lost. Left-wing political parties haven't been able to deliver on their promises for decades now. So that when they promise things like free public health care or even just to fix public health care in the countries that already have it, it sounds like they're promising everyone a magic pony and an end to rainy days and free Pepsi in all the water fountains. And what poses as a more radical left nowadays is mostly one or another version of these elitist authoritarian cults, where people pretend to care about things like the working class or social justice and racism, but it's all just a means to their own fantasies of rising to power over everyone else. And here I'm talking about the horrid cancel culture idiocy of the past 10 years, or else the dead-end fake communism that's been somehow dredged out of the toilet of the 20th century and is now just being gobbled up by all of these sad authoritarian lunatics who just love to eat the poo-poo. So, how do we get out of this death trap? Is it even possible for us to have a world that's both egalitarian and democratic and free? Do we have any other choices besides being dominated by greedy zillionaires on the one hand, or else fanatic intellectual authoritarians on the other? Can we dare dream of a world where we have actual self-government? Government for the people, by the people? This whole show exists in order to answer these questions. And I don't know the exact future any more than anyone else does, but I do have many educated reasons to think that, yes, we can have free, self-governing, democratic, prosperous societies around the world. And while I don't have an exact blueprint for how to get us there, I can tell you about the material and practical realities of our times which make it possible for us to get there, and which can illuminate what sorts of things we'll have to do in order to make it happen. And so, this is going to be a series of 4 short episodes, where I do what the authors of the Dawn of Everything book that I've been criticizing failed to do. I explain to you the basic ABCs of how human social evolution and social structure actually work, and how we got from egalitarian hunting and gathering societies to where we are now. And once we have that knowledge, and we have a vocabulary for how social change actually happens and social structure actually works, we'll be set up to understand the opportunities and the constraints inherent in the conditions of the 21st century. And that will allow us to figure out what we need to start doing to move forward towards an actually hopeful future. And I'm going to be doing all this via the ubiquitous 4-quadrant political compass meme template. And if you don't know what that is, it's an XY axis chart with 4 quadrants, where on the horizontal axis you have economic equality on the left, and economic inequality on the right. And on the y-axis, the vertical axis, you have more authoritarianism on the top and more freedom on the bottom. Though sometimes it's social conservatism on top and social libertarianism on the bottom. And people use these charts to make memes and also to place different ideologies and different politicians to see how they fit in this left-right authoritarian libertarian spectrum. Before I start, people often ask me, how is it that I believe so strongly in the capacity for social change if I'm always giving these materialist, deterministic explanations for history and for social structure? Where's the room for human agency in my ideas? Well, practical conditions only determine the limits of what's possible. But within those limits, we have agency, the ability to make conscious choices. Sometimes there's only a little room for agency, and sometimes there's a lot of room for agency. And understanding the material and practical conditions of our times and of past times not only helps us understand the limits of what's possible, but it also helps us understand what the opportunities are that are out there that we can take advantage of to achieve our goals. If I want to build a house, it's not enough to know that I have the agency to build a house. Okay, duh. But I also need to know how houses are built and what materials are better or worse for houses, for foundations, for insulation, and what materials and tools are actually available to me, realistically. Once we know this stuff, we can start making the best decisions about how to actually build a house to the best of our abilities. So let's get down to the business of understanding how human social structure is built and how we might be able to do something about our crappy current one. Let the cartoon begin. There's something really powerful which jumps out at me every time I see one of those ubiquitous 4-quadrant political compass charts or memes. And I've never heard anyone talk about it before. It's basically how each of the 4 quadrants and the political ideologies and economic systems associated with them actually represent the 4 main phases of human social evolution. And this all goes clockwise, starting at the bottom left, in chronological order, and in order of political and economic complexity. You have the era of our hunter-gatherer origins on the bottom left, which is socially libertarian and economically egalitarian. And you have the Neolithic tribal era here on the top left, which is socially conservative but economically egalitarian. And you have the Age of Kingdoms and Empires here on the top right, which are socially conservative and economically unequal. And finally, you get industrial capitalism on the bottom right, which is socially liberal but economically unequal. And it's more or less authoritarian depending on how much democracy you have, which interferes with the capitalism. And hopefully, if we get our shit together, we can actually transition back to the bottom left quadrant again, but this time as an advanced global civilization. But if we want to do that successfully, we need to understand how this process of social evolution works. The specific compass chart that really made me see the connection between this 4-quadrant meme format and the stages of human social evolution is one from the New York Times, which is looking at the 2016 American presidential election. And it's a chart of where American voters place themselves on this 4-quadrant political compass. And if you're listening to this on audio, the picture is on YouTube. And in this version of the political compass, the vertical axis says more socially conservative on top and more socially liberal on the bottom. And the original chart has Trump voters in red and Hillary Clinton voters in blue and people who voted for other parties like Mr. Potato Head in green. But I'm showing it here in black and white because for our purposes, what matters is how people describe themselves in terms of being more or less socially conservative or liberal and preferring more or less economic equality or inequality, and not which candidate they thought would get them those things that they prefer. And you'll notice that in terms of the amount of people, the popularity of each one of these quadrants, you have by far the most people in the bottom left quadrant, the one where people prefer more economic equality and more social liberty. And then you have the second most people in the top left quadrant, the one that prefers social conservatism and economic equality. And you have the third most, which is close behind the second most, on the top right, which prefers economic inequality and social conservatism. And you have the least amount of people, by far, in the bottom right quadrant, which represents economic inequality and social liberalism. So I'm going to explain how these quadrants represent the 4 phases of human history and social evolution, and why does it get less and less popular as we go in a clockwise direction. Now, talking about stages of evolution is taboo nowadays in anthropology and academia because it's associated with 19th century colonialism and ranking people according to their superiority or inferiority. But that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It is just a fact that there are different types of social organization, and they emerged in the world in a chronological order of increasing complexity. You can't have complex civilization without having had hunting and gathering first, and then farming, etc. But that doesn't mean that more complex is better, it just means it's more complex. By most metrics, life as a hunter-gatherer is actually far superior to life in a medieval European kingdom, for example, even compared to the richest people in medieval Europe. And these four eras or types of social organization don't just happen in a straight line everywhere at once. You still have some hunter-gatherers today, for example, and sometimes people would go from farming back to hunting and gathering, and some hunter-gatherers go and become parts of large civilizations without becoming farmers first. There are all sorts of specific things happening in all sorts of places, different times, but nonetheless, it's just a fact that across the world, humans all start as hunter-gatherers about 300,000 years ago, and over time farming emerges, and tribal organization happens, and pastoralism appears, and then you get more complex stratified societies with classes and chiefs, and you eventually get kingdoms, and you get urban areas and civilizations, and a shift towards commerce, and then you get capitalism and industrialization. The authors of Dawn of Everything and a lot of postmodernist anthropologists try to just pretend, well, nothing happens for any reason. It just all just sort of happened like this by accident. But there are definitely reasons, which we'll see as we go. So putting all of this in this clockwise chronological spectrum is an oversimplification, but it's also true. If you follow the show already, you know that for most of our existence as human beings, which was 300,000 years ago or so, until about 12,000 years ago, most human societies were probably organized into what are called immediate return nomadic hunter-gatherer societies. And these are societies that follow around big game all year round, and they gather fruits and tubers and plants along the way. And there were most likely some exceptions in particular conditions and times and places, like in the Ice Age in Europe, for example. But what's striking about these nomadic forager societies, the ones that we know of from recent times and historical times and archaeology, is that they're both extremely egalitarian, and they also enjoy a very high level of individual freedom and autonomy. And it's argued by many of the anthropologists who study them and who have lived with them that the equality that these societies enjoy is basically a function of the fact that people fiercely guard and strive for individual liberty and autonomy. Everyone tries to make sure that no one has more power or wealth than anyone else, because one person's power comes at the expense of another person's freedom. Like I've pointed out in other episodes, no one wants to be dominated in any society. Like, some people enjoy being more submissive, but dominance starts when consent ends. It's like the difference between sadomasochism versus sexual assault. Everyone wants freedom, which can include the freedom to be a follower and to submit and obey somebody else, until you don't want to obey that person anymore, until it oppresses you and it exploits you and is against your interests. Now, the way that you prevent domination, the way that you maximize your own freedom, is to enforce equality of power. And wealth is power. Wealth will buy you influence if it's easier to be gifted your wealth than to get your own, and it buys you control if people depend on that wealth and they can't access it on their own. That's why your boss tells you what to do all day instead of the other way around. That's why it's your landlord and not you who decides what color you can and can't paint your walls in your own home. The person who owns the resources that you need to survive, who owns the means of production, who owns your workplace, those people control you. They get to tell you what to do. The more power people have over you, the less liberty you have, by definition. So these egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies have what's called demand sharing, or tolerated theft, depending on who's describing it. And what that means is you have to share whatever you have with whoever's asking. And when I say that these societies are egalitarian, I mean that not only do they all have the same general level of wealth, but they also basically have equal status. There are no classes, there are no chiefs, no religious authorities. Men don't boss around women. Even children have a high degree of freedom and independence from their parents once they can feed themselves. Now, when the young men, the boys, go out to hunt, they'll designate and follow a hunting party leader because he's recognized for his abilities. But the second they get home, he's just like anybody else. And the second he stops being a good leader, nobody follows him anymore. As we've seen a bit before, and as we'll look at in more detail in a future episode, the reason that these hunter-gatherer societies are so egalitarian is that there's no real way for anyone to dominate anyone else. Dominance hierarchy requires one person or group of people to be able to control resources that other people depend on to live. And because of the nomadic foraging way of life, you can't hoard all the food that people need because people can always just go a few steps away and find some berries and animals to hunt and gather. And if someone is a bully and tries to tell you what to do and to use force against you, you can just leave and go to a different camp. Or anyone can just kill anyone else, whether you're strong or weak, because you have poison projectile weapons. In these societies, if someone's a bully or is trying to be dominant beyond a certain point, the community basically gives them some chances to come correct, and if they don't, they exile them or even execute them as a public menace. And men can't dominate women, including their own wives, because women can also just leave, and they'll have male relatives and friends and boyfriends around who can punish their abusers. And women can also act collectively through their specific women's organizations to humiliate and ostracize offending men in various ways. Try being a big pickup artist and fuckboy when the whole community of women has decided that no one is going to have sex with you anymore, and pretty soon you will adjust your behavior. So if someone tries to dominate you and become a bully, they'll eventually find out that there's no winning that war. And because hunter-gatherer life requires group cooperation, the conflict involved of people testing the waters to learn this lesson for themselves every generation over and over is very destructive and very dangerous. And if you're having all these disputes with fighting and rape accusations and murder happening at the wrong time of year or the wrong seasons, you can cause hunger or death for everyone in the camp. So if the material conditions that create this equality of bargaining power persist for long enough, over time you develop social rules and values and cultural practices and rituals and feelings and ideas that bolster the existing social structure and the existing balance of power in advance, so you don't test the waters and you don't cause chaos for battles that you can't win. And we see this over and over for all societies where conditions are stable, whether they're egalitarian or hierarchical or gender equal or patriarchal or whatever it may be. Now, because everyone is free and equal in these societies, we not only have economic equality and individual autonomy, but also social liberalism. People can behave as they please, so long as they're not violating sharing norms or norms about conflict. Basically, anything that doesn't threaten equality of power is acceptable. So, for example, there is a gendered division of labor in all of these societies for practical reasons, but gender roles are usually not enforced. Men and women can do each other's work. Anthropologist Helga Vierich talks about how she was with some foragers in the Kalahari Desert, and it was previously believed that only men were allowed to be shamans. Like, there's no reporting of any female shaman, and a shaman is a magic healer. So it was thought that the position was reserved for men. But she noticed there was a rather masculine-looking woman in the camp that she was at, and this woman was also a shaman. And nobody blinked or said anything about it one way or the other or judged her in any way. And they didn't need a special third gender category or some kind of trans identity for this person. She was just a woman who was on the masculine end of the physical spectrum in her looks and behavior, and who also wanted to do certain cultural activities that normally guys do. But she was still part of the women's organization, participated in women's dances, and saw herself as a woman. And there was also a male gay couple at that camp. And again, no one thought anything of it. And they were actually kind of popular because they had no kids, which meant that if they hunted a big game animal, then there would be more meat to share for the rest of the camp. And there are specific rules on how you share the meat so that there's no disputes and that everyone gets a more or less equal share over time. And there are a lot of stories famously about these hunter-gatherer societies enjoying a good amount of extramarital sex. But you have some groups that were straight up polyamorous, guys with multiple female long-term partners or wives, and the other way around as well, women with 2 boyfriends or 2 husbands and whatnot. But it's also a source of a lot of jealousy and tension, so in most societies it tends to be discouraged. But there's no punishment for it besides having an angry, jealous girlfriend or boyfriend or spouse and being annoyed all day long and getting into fistfights. And when it comes to religion, these types of hunter-gatherers are notoriously very open-minded and chill about it. Kalahari foragers, for example, see their gods as almost their equals. And the Hadza in the Tanzanian savannah are known for being almost atheistic. Like when you ask them what happens after you die, they say stuff like, well, people cry and we bury you in a cave and then we leave. And if you press them on it, they say stuff like, I don't know, maybe you go to the sun or something, we can't know these things. So all of this is to say that for most of our existence, 300,000 years ago until about 12,000 years ago, with some exceptions, most people would have lived in societies that would fall on the extreme bottom left of the four-quadrant political compass. And surprise, surprise, that is where most people seem to find themselves politically even today, according to this 2016 American voter chart at least. So remember that we've been taught for like 80 years since the beginning of the Cold War that you can have either equality or freedom, but not both. Well, here's an example of why that's total bullshit. Equality and freedom go hand in hand, and they're actually inseparable from each other. You can't even have one without the other, just like the French Revolutionary slogan says, equality, liberty, and fraternity. And by equality, we mean equality of power. So that's the first 300,000 years or so of human existence. In the next episode, we'll see how we went from socially liberal and economically egalitarian societies to societies that are socially conservative with extreme sexual repression, but that are still economically egalitarian. And we'll also look at how we went from societies with loose, fluid band organization to a more fixed tribal organization, where everyone is organized by how related they are to each other. And we'll also see how we went from almost total political egalitarianism to male dominance and gerontocracy. And we'll also see how some agricultural societies managed to avoid male dominance and sexual repression and conservatism, and instead they ended up with a high degree of gender equality, with women in most of the positions of political leadership, despite frequent war and violence. But first, I need to do all this stuff and remind you to like and subscribe. And also, if you can, please send me some money and donate to the show. And you can do that via Patreon or PayPal or Ko-fi, per episode, monthly, or one-time donations. Links are in the show notes and the channel homepage. I have the type of show that's like an anti-confirmation bias machine. It's like the opposite of what the algorithm likes. And each time I make an episode, I get a bunch of new subscribers and donors, and then I also get a bunch of people angrily canceling their previous subscriptions, because if I'm telling you what you want to hear on one episode, I'm telling you what you don't want to hear in the next episode. And right now, it's actually become financially viable for me to do this full time, but just barely. And the last couple of episodes really pissed off a lot of people, which is stressful. So please help out if you can. Now, normally I spend about a full week after every episode answering all of the comments and writing giant encyclopedias and essays and engaging in endless debates with all of you. But this time what I'm going to do is try really hard not to answer any comments, but instead what I'm going to do is answer all of your comments and critiques in a big question and answer discussion episode when I'm going to tie together everything that I presented in these 4 quadrant episodes with all of your questions and concerns in mind. And going forward, I'm going to try to make that how I deal with questions, so that more people can benefit from all the fire that I'm spitting out in these comments, which only a small group of people currently actually read. And also because my ideas really do evolve thanks to your arguments and questions, and often no one gets to see it unless they like to spend time reading the comments. Also, once I'm finished with the 4 quadrants, thanks to my donors, I will finally be able to put out all the long-awaited episodes that I haven't been able to complete until now for financial reasons, like how the Russian Revolution flopped and turned into a dictatorship, and the next episodes of the Israel-Palestine series, and also the next chapters of Dawn of Everything. So enormous thanks to all my donors for that. I'll see you in about a week or so, and until then, see ya!